My parents are demanding I help pay off my sister's $10,000 debt after cutting me off, all because I didn't pursue medicine like her. Now, I'm helping them by inadvertently doubling their debt for free. To give some context, my parents come from families where no one ever went to college. They always emphasized that education was the only way to escape poverty. When I was born, they already had everything planned out. I would be a doctor. Not just any doctor, but specifically a surgeon. They had the entire timeline mapped out, from kindergarten straight through to medical school. My sister was born 5 years later and received the same treatment. Growing up felt like living in a pressure cooker. My dad would quiz me from anatomy books when I was 8 years old. My mom enrolled me in every science camp and private math tutoring session she could afford. By middle school, I knew more about the human circulatory system than most high school students knew about anything. But here's the kicker. I was good at art, really good. I could draw realistic portraits at age 10. I painted landscapes that made people stop and stare. When I showed my work to my parents, my dad would glance at them and say something like, "That's nice. Now go study for your chemistry exam." My mom would hang a piece or two on the refrigerator, but she never truly looked at them. In high school, my art teacher told me I had real talent and should consider applying to art schools. She even offered to help me put together a portfolio. That night, I brought it up at dinner. The silence lasted about 30 seconds. Then, Dad put down his fork and told me that art was a hobby, not a career. They reminded me that I had already been accepted into the state university's pre-med program, and that was final. My sister was different from me. She actually liked everything medical. She won the state science fair 3 years in a row. Our parents loved showing her off to relatives and neighbors. She was everything they wanted me to be. The breaking point came in my 3rd year of college. I was taking organic chemistry, physics, and anatomy all at the same time. My GPA dropped to 2.8. I wasn't sleeping. I stopped eating well, and my roommate found me passed out in the library twice. One week, I called home and told Mom I needed to take a semester off. She immediately put Dad on the line to ask if I was on drugs. I told them, no, I just need time to think, maybe explore other options. My dad asked, what other options? I took a deep breath and told them I wanted to transfer to an art school. I had already been accepted into 3 different programs. There was complete silence, and then my mother told me they needed to talk in person. I drove home that weekend expecting a long conversation. Instead, they sat me down and gave me an ultimatum. Go back to college and finish pre-med, or they would cut off all financial support. No more tuition, no more car insurance, no more health insurance. They would also stop speaking to me until I came to my senses. I tried to explain that I could get scholarships for art school. I showed them my portfolio and my acceptance letters. Dad looked through everything without saying a word, then handed it back to me. Mom said I was throwing my future away by making little finger drawings. I had about $8,000 saved from working during the summers. The following Monday, I withdrew from all my classes. That was 6 years ago. I haven't spoken to my parents since that weekend. I transferred to an art school on a partial scholarship and worked to pay for the rest. Despite what my parents said, I haven't done badly at all. Last year, I was promoted to creative director and I earned $95,000 a year. It's not what a doctor would make, but it's fine for me. My sister and I stayed in touch on social media for the first few years. She sent me updates about her medical school applications. I sent her photos of my latest projects, but little by little, we talked less. She was accepted into medical school when I graduated from art. Our parents threw a big party for her. I saw the photos on Facebook. 2 weeks ago, I found my parents at my door's peephole. I opened the door, but I didn't invite them in. They told me they had made a mistake and needed to talk to me. They said they had been wrong to give me that ultimatum and should have supported my decision to pursue art. Then Dad said something that really caught my attention. He mentioned they had been going through a very difficult time lately and could use some family support. I asked him, what kind of difficult time? Mom looked at Dad, then looked at me. She said my sister had been having problems in medical school, just a little stress and adjustment difficulties, nothing serious. I asked them how they found my address if we hadn't spoken in 6 years. Dad said they hired someone to track me down. The entire conversation lasted maybe 20 minutes. They asked if I would consider having dinner with them next weekend. I told them I needed time to think about it. The next day, I called my cousin, who is my sister's age and used to be close with her. I asked if he knew anything about my sister's problems in medical school. Well, my sister wasn't just having adjustment problems. She flunked out of medical school last semester. Not just for bad grades, she was caught cheating on her final exams. She was expelled from the school and reported to the state medical board. She can never reapply to medicine. She moved back in with our parents and hasn't left the house in 3 months. She's not looking for a job or talking about her future. She just sleeps until noon and plays video games. I'm not a doctor, but that sounds like pretty severe depression. Apparently, our parents are devastated. All their friends and relatives knew my sister was in medicine. They had been bragging for years that they would have a doctor in the family, and now they have to explain why she's living in their basement with no degree and no future. That's where all their interest in me comes from, because even if I'm not a doctor, at least I'm the only one of their children who did finish college. That's why I don't want to rebuild that relationship with them. I understand my sister and her breakdown because it's something I also experienced. I was lucky enough to escape, to get out from under our parents' pressure. I'm not going to fall back into that. Update 1. I thought my lack of response to them was enough, but 3 days after my first post, they showed up at my office. They walked into my office, and my mom said she had no idea I was so successful. Dad asked about my salary and if I owned my apartment or rented it. I stood behind the desk and asked them what they wanted. Dad said they had expected me to call them after our last conversation. Since I didn't, they thought they should try again. Mom pulled out her phone and showed me pictures of my sister lying in bed. Then Dad changed the subject. He said they had been thinking about my offer to help them financially. I replied, "What offer? I never committed to anything." Dad looked confused and said he thought that was why I had been so successful, so I could help the family when they needed it. He mentioned they were having trouble paying my sister's student loans. Even though she didn't graduate, they still owed $10,000. I told them I wasn't going to help with any student loans, but my parents argued that they had made many sacrifices to educate me and that they weren't going to leave empty-handed. But they were against me studying all this, so it wasn't fair for them to come and demand anything from me. For my dad, back then, I was making bad decisions, and they needed to teach me a lesson. Now my sister needed help, and I was the only one who could give it to her. I asked them to leave my office, and they agreed, but only because they were giving me time to think it over. That weekend, my sister called me directly. It was the first time I had heard her voice in 3 years. She didn't ask directly, but she mentioned how stressed she was about the debt and how hard it was to find jobs without a degree. I asked my sister what really happened in medical school. She explained that she had been struggling for 2 years, but she was afraid to tell our parents. The subjects were harder than she expected. She was failing several classes, but she kept trying to catch up. During her last semester, she was so far behind that she panicked. She copied another student's answers on the final pathology exam. The professor caught her and reported her to the academic council. My sister said she knew she had ruined everything, but she couldn't bear the thought of disappointing our parents. They had invested so much money and had talked about her being a doctor since she was 5 years old. Then, my sister said something that really bothered me. Apparently, our parents calculated that I could pay $2,000 a month in installments. I told my sister I wasn't going to pay her student loans. She started to cry, though she understood, but she didn't know what she was going to do. She said our parents were furious with her and barely spoke to her. I asked her if she wanted to meet without our parents knowing. She said yes. There. She told me more details about what happened after her expulsion. Our parents had already told all their friends and relatives that she would graduate from medical school. They had planned a big party for when she became a doctor. They told most people that my sister was taking a gap year for health reasons, but some relatives found out the truth. My sister said our parents blame her for embarrassing the family. They also blame her for wasting all the money they spent on her education. Dad took out a second mortgage on the house to help pay for medical school, but here's what shocked me the most. My sister said our parents had been talking about me for months before showing up at my apartment. They spent weeks planning their approach. My sister said they practiced what they were going to say to me. They rehearsed the conversation several times. Dad even wrote key points on a piece of paper. She also told me they had backup plans. If I didn't agree to help financially, they were going to contact my coworkers and try to publicly shame me into helping. I asked my sister why she was telling me all this. She told me she was tired of being part of their manipulation. She also said she regretted how they treated me 6 years ago, but there was something odd about how she was telling me some things. I decided to test if my sister was being honest with me. I called her and told her I was thinking about helping with a small portion of her student debt, which wasn't true, but that I wanted to meet with our parents first to discuss it. My sister immediately got nervous and said maybe it wasn't a good idea. Our parents were under a lot of stress and might not handle the conversation well. She suggested I send the money directly to her instead. That was all I needed to know. I told my sister I had changed my mind about helping her financially. She got angry and said I was just like them, that I only cared about money and success. She hung up on me. 3 days later, my cousin called me. He said our parents had been calling several relatives to ask for money to help with my sister's student loans. They were saying I had refused to help my own sister and were asking if anyone else could contribute. They told my aunt that I made over 6 figures but didn't want to give a single cent to my family. As far as I know, no one is willing to help. It's not just a few $1,000s. I used to feel sorry for my sister, but now seeing that she is just like them, I don't feel so bad. Update 2. My parents' harassment borders on ridiculous. They've started visiting me at places I go outside of work, like my gym. Dad approached and got on the treadmill next to mine. He started talking about how disappointed he was with my attitude, that it was just a bit of money, and that would be all. I turned off the treadmill and walked away. Dad followed me to the locker room and kept talking. He said they weren't asking for charity, they were asking for family support, that if the roles were reversed, they would help me without hesitation. But the roles were reversed, and they acted like I'm acting now, so that was their best teaching. Dad said that was totally different because they knew I would be fine, but the debt my sister incurred was out of control. The interest was accumulating too quickly. I left the gym telling them that I also knew I would be fine. Yes, that was a very big lie. 3 days later, they were waiting by my car when I left work. The loan payments were $2,400 a month, and they couldn't pay them with just their income. I asked them why my sister couldn't get a job to help pay her own debt. Mom said my sister was still recovering from her depression and wasn't ready to work, that she needed time. Maybe if I paid for a while, she could get back on her feet without the pressure, and then they wouldn't need my money anymore. Dad said they had considered bankruptcy, but this loan can't be discharged that way. That debt would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Their house was already mortgaged to help pay for my sister's education. And then Dad said something that made me realize how far they were willing to go. He said they had been talking to a lawyer about their options. The lawyer told them they might be able to sue me for abandonment of family obligations. I told him I wasn't a lawyer or an accountant, so I didn't know anything about those things, but they weren't my problems either. Dad had spoken to one, and they were analyzing their options, which sounded like threats. Since I was successful and they were a trio of debtors, they were looking for a way to force me to pay for the years of raising me. I told him that sounded ridiculous and left, but it bothered me enough to research it when I got home. No, they can't sue me for raising me, but they can sue me for having paid for my first years of college. Then, my sister started texting me several times a day. She said she was having panic attacks because of the debt and couldn't sleep. She sent me photos of her statements showing how much she owed. I blocked my sister's number after she sent me a message saying she was thinking of harming herself and the financial pressure wouldn't end. That seemed like emotional manipulation designed to make me feel responsible for her mental health. I'm not going to play their game, and if they seek to sue me, I'm going to use my money to countersue for whatever I can. It's not my fault they were bad parents. Update 3. My cousin called me with more information. He said our parents were telling relatives that my sister was suicidal due to her student debt. They were saying I could easily solve the problem, but I chose not to help. My cousin said some family members were starting to take sides. My sister's situation generated sympathy, while my refusal to help was seen as coldness and selfishness. Several relatives had offered small contributions to help my sister, but it wasn't enough. My cousin also told me something that explained a lot. Our parents had apparently been living beyond their means for years. The second mortgage on the house wasn't just for my sister's medical school, it was also to pay off credit card debts and maintain their lifestyle. They had been counting on my sister becoming a doctor and eventually helping them financially. That's when I made my decision. I was no longer going to remain defensive against their manipulation. I needed to go on the offensive. I wrote a detailed email encouraging people not to help my parents because they would only continue to feed that black hole of money. My dad's older brother called me the day after receiving the email. He told me he had lent my parents $15,000 2 years ago and they never paid it back. He was starting to suspect they had asked several relatives for money with no intention of paying them back. The uncle said he was going to talk to other relatives to find out how much money they had lent our parents in total. He suspected it was much more than anyone imagined. 3 days later, the uncle called me back with shocking news. My parents had asked at least 8 family members for money in the last 3 years, totaling over $100,000. None of those loans had been repaid. They told each person a different story, medical bills, home repairs, etc., and made each lender promise discretion, so no one knew how much money they were really asking for. The uncle said the family planned to confront my parents about the loans. My sister's student loans were simply the most recent crisis they used as an excuse to ask for money. The confrontation happened last weekend at a family party I didn't attend. Several relatives brought up the subject of the loans during the party. My parents first denied having asked for so much money. Then they said they planned to pay everyone back once my sister became a doctor. When the relatives pointed out that my sister wasn't going to be a doctor, Mom burst into tears and said it wasn't necessary to remind her. My parents had to flee because the family wanted their money. All of it. Now this brings us to what I found out yesterday. My parents filed a lawsuit against me, alleging that I owe them for the expenses they incurred after I abandoned medicine. The lawsuit claims $50,000, which is more than that supposed debt, but they are arguing emotional damages. This morning I met with a lawyer who told me that the lawsuit has no legal basis and will probably be dismissed soon, but that it might not be the end, and that our best defense now is to countersue to at least make them cover the legal costs. And so, that's my life right now. Edit. To clarify how much money my parents invested in my education while I was studying medicine. Only $7,500. The rest were loans in my name, which I have already paid off. So not only do they have no legal basis, it's absurd to demand $50,000, but absurd will be my lesson when they lose the lawsuit. Update 4. The lawsuit was dismissed 3 months ago, just as my lawyer predicted. The judge gave my parents a warning for the lawsuit, but that wasn't the end of it. My parents hired another lawyer and filed an appeal. They also modified their lawsuit to include defamation, alleging that my email to family members had damaged their reputation in the community, which I'll talk about more later. While dealing with the legal matters, I kept receiving reports from my cousin about what my parents were doing. Apparently, they had decided that if they couldn't get money from the family, they would try other sources. My sister opened a crowdfunding campaign asking for help to pay her student loans. The page said she had been forced to drop out of medical school due to a family crisis and was now struggling with overwhelming debt. It didn't mention that she had been expelled for cheating. The page raised about $3,000 in 2 weeks, mostly from people who didn't know the real story. But then someone who did know about my sister's expulsion left a comment explaining what had really happened. The page was deleted the next day. Some relatives are talking about suing my parents for the money they owe them. They want to include interest on those loans and they want them to pay now. Anyway, the second court hearing for their appeal took place last week. My parents showed up with their lawyer, but they also brought my sister as a character witness. The judge listened to their arguments for about 10 minutes before interrupting them. He said their case had no merit and that it was clearly being used to harass me. Not only did he dismiss the appeal, but he also ordered them to pay my legal expenses. Outside the courthouse, Dad tried to approach me. He said all this had gotten out of control and maybe we could reach some private agreement. He wanted me to give them $5,000 to put all this behind us, but I reminded him that he had already lost the case and they had nothing to compel me to pay. My lawyer has added a debt of $6,000 in legal fees to them and knows debt collectors who will handle the debt. He also commented that if they tried to file more lawsuits, he could sue them for harassment and get even more money out of them than those miserable $6,000. He's confident that if they want to, he can chase their asses for the rest of eternity. My parents are losing their house. The combination of my sister's student loan payments, their existing debts, and the legal costs has made it impossible to keep up with the mortgage. Apparently, my sister got a job at a retail store, but she only works part-time and earns minimum wage. The three of them will share an apartment, combining their salaries. I hope my parents sue again, though my lawyer is more eager for that to happen. If they are smart, they will leave me alone for good. They are likely facing lawsuits from relatives, so they won't have much time for me right now. Edit. My parents are being sued by my relatives for the loans they still owe them. Not all of them are doing it. There's one relative who has said they don't want to hit my parents while they're down. The rest have joined forces and hired a lawyer to handle the case. I estimate that between my lawyer's fees, the loans with interest, and the expenses of this new lawsuit, my parents could end up paying over $200,000. You could say I've doubled their debt by them messing with me, and it only cost me one email that was intended to clarify some things they were spreading. Update 5. My parents have confessed to my aunt, who has confessed to my cousin, who has confessed to me, and who I am now confessing to you, that they have a total debt of $150,000 after losing the family's class action lawsuit. That's after they started paying some of the debt in recent months and after selling the house. So the original debt could have been at least $50,000 more if we discount the value of the house. They still have a long way to go until they can pay off the rest of the debt. My sister has finally moved out on her own, while my parents have had to get a one-bedroom apartment just to make enough each month to pay what they owe. I know my sister doesn't want them near her because she doesn't want to be responsible for that debt. Nor is she legally. She wasn't the one who borrowed from relatives. She didn't sign the student loan, and she hasn't sued me. Her karma is having a minimum wage job and our parents hating her for not becoming a doctor. That would have solved all my parents' problems, and now this story wouldn't exist. That was an alternate timeline where my parents lived happily ever after despite what they did to me. But in this one, they will live forever with debt. I like this timeline better.